Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to Newsnight. G7 has begun in Cornwall in southwest of England. Global leaders have pledged to find decisive solutions to critical challenges facing the world. Managing vaccination drive for COVID-19 is an obvious priority. More on that in the show up ahead. On the COVID front back home, daily new cases continue to stay below the 1 lakh mark. Delhi government's proposed food grain delivery scheme, meanwhile, has turned into quite a controversy. All that and more. First, the top stories. India reports less than 1 lakh daily COVID cases for the fourth day. 91,702 active cases recorded. In the past 24 hours, cases come down by 78% from the peak of second wave. Recovery rate further climbs to 94.93%. Vaccination development and manufacturing picks up pace in India. 24.6 crore doses administered so far. Over 1 crore doses still available with states and union territories. 38 lakh additional doses will be delivered in the next 3 days. Government committed to tackling the vaccine hesitancy. G7 summit begins in the UK. Prime Minister Boris Johnson kicks off plenary session with focus on beating the pandemic together and ensuring economies recover. Climate change also on the agenda. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to participate virtually in G7 outreach sessions. Spectre of COVID pandemic hangs over G7 host town. Cornwall, a hotel hosting media and security staff for the summit, shuts following fresh coronavirus cases. External Affairs Minister addresses Indian diaspora in Kuwait, thanks Kuwait for providing more than 500 metric tons of liquid medical oxygen, says MOU to benefit Indian workers in Kuwait finalized. Union Minister and BJP leader Ravi Shankar Prasad lashes out at Kejriwal government, accuses Delhi government is under control of the Russian mafia, says they have failed to provide even oxygen to people in the national capital. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also holds talks with BJP President. Party calls the meeting routine affair. Speculations rise over assembly elections in the state next year. Mumbai reports severe waterlogging in many areas due to rains. Southwest monsoon to become active in Chhattisgarh, West Bengal and eastern Uttar Pradesh in the next 48 hours. In sports, clash of the titans in French Open men's singles semi-finals. 13-time French Open champion Rafael Nadal takes on Novak Djokovic. Let's first take stock of the COVID situation. India's active COVID caseload is consistently on a decline. Daily new cases have been below 1 lakh for the past 4 days now. Some media reports have highlighted a sense of hesitancy to take the vaccine in rural areas of the country. The centre is working with states on a regular basis to address this issue. The centre has also dismissed reports that allege that CoWIN app has been hacked. It has reiterated that all the data is secure.
India's war against coronavirus continues. Due to the strong steps of the union and state governments, the pace of fresh cases of COVID-19 is decreasing continuously. For the last 4 days, not only has the number of daily new cases remained below 1 lakh, but the positivity rate has been less than 10% for the 18th consecutive day. India reports 91,702 new cases in the last 24 hours. India's active caseload further declines to 11,21,671. Net decrease of 46,281 in active cases in the last 24 hours. Less than 1 lakh cases for the fourth day. 2 crore 77 lakh 90,073 total recoveries across the country so far. 1,34,580 patients recovered during the last 24 hours. Recoveries continue to outnumber the daily new cases for the 29th consecutive day. Recovery rate increases to 94.93%. Weekly positivity rate currently at 5.14%. Daily positivity rate at 4.49%, less than 10% for the 18th consecutive day.
पिछले 5 हफ्तों से कंटिन्यू डिक्रीजिंग ट्रेंड इन पॉजिटिविटी देश में नोट किया गया है, जहां की 30 अप्रैल से 6 मई वाले सप्ताह में देश में एवरेज पॉजिटिविटी वाज अराउंड 21.6%। वह एवरेज पॉजिटिविटी पिछले एक हफ्ते में घटते हुए 5.6% तक हो गई है, यानी कि जो पीक ऑफ पॉजिटिविटी देश में ऑब्जर्व किया गया उसमें 74% डिक्रीज हमने देश में नोट किया है।
The centre has said that the cases of COVID-19 have decreased by 78% from the peak levels few weeks back. 24 states are reporting declining cases, but officials have cautioned against any complacency.
हम आप सबसे विनती करना चाहते हैं, केसेस कम हो रहे हैं, लेकिन इससे हमें ये ध्यान रखना है कि हमें दोबारा इन्फेक्शन को बढ़ने से रोकना है, जिसके लिए हमें कोविड एप्रोप्रिएट बिहेवियर को अपने जीवन में समाहित करना पड़ेगा।
पार्टियों का टाइम अभी नहीं आया है। अगर आप बंद माहौल में हैं, लोग हैं आपके सामने, तब भी मास्क पहनिए, बाहर भी मास्क पहनिए। तो ये सारी प्रिकॉशंस हमें लेके आगे बढ़ना होगा।
The vaccination drive continues unabated throughout the nation. More than 24.60 crore vaccine doses have been provided to the states and UTs so far. Health Ministry officials have stressed on the importance of a timely second dose.
जिनको एक डोज मिली है वो प्लीज दूसरी डोज लीजिए, थोड़ा एफर्ट करिए। ये ठीक नहीं है कि इवन हेल्थ वर्कर्स ने, बहुत सारों ने सेकेंड डोज नहीं ली है, फ्रंटलाइन वर्कर्स ने ली है और बुजुर्गों ने नहीं ली है। इसको अपनी जिम्मेवारी से भी थोड़ा एफर्ट करिए ताकि हम पूरी तरह से प्रोटेक्टेड हों।
Some media reports have highlighted a sense of hesitancy to take the vaccine in rural areas. The centre is working with the states on a regular basis to address the issue. Apart from this, the centre has also urged the states to make efforts to increase awareness about the need to take the vaccine and follow COVID-appropriate behaviour in the tribal areas of the nation. The centre also said that many other vaccine candidates will soon be available in the country.
बायोई का वैक्सीन दिखाई दे रहा है, कैडिला जाइडस का डीएनए वैक्सीन दिखाई दे रहा है, उसके बाद में जिनोवा का एमआरएनए वैक्सीन दिखाई दे रहा है, नेजल वैक्सीन दिखाई दे रहा है, J&J की प्रोडक्शन यहाँ पे होगी। वैक्सीन की डेवलपमेंट में कटिंग एज टेक्नोलॉजी है, उसकी तरफ भारत की इंडस्ट्री का और साइंटिफिक कम्युनिटी की ग्रास्प जो है वो और बढ़ गई है।
Centre has also dismissed reports that alleged that CoWIN app has been hacked. It has been reiterated that all the data is secure. Meanwhile, vaccination campaign for 18 to 45 years of age group in Jammu and Kashmir is picking up pace. In Delhi, a vaccination camp is being run in the Radha Swami Satsang Byas Bharti campus. The main feature of the camp is that it is a walk-in facility on first-come, first-served basis, a matter of relief for many people who availed this facility.
ये नहीं कि सत्संग से जुड़ा हुआ कोई व्यक्ति हो, कोई भी कहीं का भी यहाँ पर आके अगर उसको पता है यहाँ पर कैंप लगा है और वो यहाँ पर आ रहा है और वैक्सीन लगवा रहा है, तो उसको उसी तरीके से केयर किया जाता है जैसे एक घर का मेंबर हो।
मैं कहता हूँ इम्प्रेस्ड किया बहुत ही यहाँ के सेवादारों ने।
Kerala has announced strict measures to check the number of cases for 2 days starting Saturday. Authorities have been told to clamp down on violations strictly. The Tamil Nadu government has extended the ongoing lockdown in the state till June 21st with more relaxations. In Gujarat as well, life is coming back to normal. Somnath temple has been opened for the devotees after a gap of 61 days.
सैनिटाइजर है, मास्क पहन के आप सरलता से दर्शन कर रहे हैं 2 गज की दूरी से, और कर्मचारी और पंडित जी सभी को आपको साथ दे रहे हैं और अच्छा महसूस हो रहा है।
The numbers are receding in many states, while others are trying their best to arrest the surge. The occasion calls for a united effort by all Indians to tackle this once-in-a-century crisis. Bureau Report, DD India.
So from COVID-19 in India and the country to the challenge of the pandemic across the world, now G7 summit has begun, and fighting the challenge of COVID-19 is one of the topmost priority. Next, let's understand the core agenda of the G7 summit and the manner in which it seeks to handle the COVID situation and the vaccination drive. So the vaccination push is one of the core agendas, greater responsibility for advanced democracies. There is a sense of obligation of the advanced economies, of the bigger economies, to make sure that the poorer nations get access to a vaccine. United States, in fact, on its own has donated about 500 million doses of COVAX. President Biden had announced COVAX, remember, is an international association along with WHO to ensure that equitable distribution of vaccine takes place. COVAX has supplied about 80 million doses of COVID vaccines to developing countries so far, and the summit is expected to further boost this initiative. The summit also, the leaders of the G7 countries pledge to inoculate the world by the end of next year. That's 2022. That's a big aim and ambition to put forth. How will that come into being? How will that happen? They've committed about 1 billion vaccine doses to the developing countries. So the richer, more advanced countries come together to ensure that the poorer nations, developing nations, get access to the vaccine. Let's move on to the next point about the manner in which vaccine push is being talked about. New global treaty on the pandemic preparedness is also the focus, to ensure that even after this pandemic, the world, countries, developing countries, advanced countries are better prepared to deal with pandemic from the lessons that we've learned from the current one. Two important issues are also in focus. One is vaccine passport, another patent waiver. Let me explain each of the issues one by one. A vaccine passport is a notion that individuals who have got a vaccine should be able to travel across the world. Now, this sort of a condition on movement and passport makes it difficult for people from developing countries to go forward, because not everyone in developing countries has been as efficiently been able to be vaccinated. So India, representing the voice of developed countries, has spoken against the concept of vaccine passport. At the same time, the concept of patent waiver for vaccines. So as of now, we know that very few countries have got the copyright of the vaccines that have been indigenously developed in their own countries. Now, the idea of waiving the patent for the vaccines is to make sure that even poorer countries and developing countries are able to produce vaccines on their own. Let's also see, in the context of the presidency of the UK in G7, what did Prime Minister Boris Johnson say? He says our shared task is to overcome the pandemic, minimize the risk of any recurrence, and build back better after this tragedy. So important statements that came in from the Prime Minister. Let's see what more he had to say. He also says the genius and perseverance of our scientists have given us a safe, effective vaccine against COVID-19. Now our most it's time to use them to protect the humanity as swiftly as possible. Some important statements there made by Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK. Let's move on to the things that he says further in the context of the agenda of G7 and how important it is for equitable distribution of vaccine. And he says the target of billion doses to developing countries, delivering 1 billion doses to developing countries in order to vaccinate everyone in the world by the end of next year, that's 2022. We're looking at some important statements that UK, that is hosting G7, its Prime Minister had said in the run-up to the beginning of the summit. He also says we must build back better. Now, build back better is the theme of G7 this year, with a global economic recovery based on greener and fairer foundations. So there is also the idea of sustainable development that lies at the heart of the G7 summit. From the pandemic, another core agenda of the G7 also lies with the climate change agenda. Need for accountability by the leading economies. So the advanced countries also need to come forward and speak about what have they done to ensure that the challenge of climate change is met with commendable and credible efforts. Safeguarding biodiversity for future generation is also one of the core agenda of the G7 meet, the means in which it can be done. And some targets have also been set. If you can move to the next plate, the targets is to protect at least 30% of land and ocean by the year 2030, and all countries have to come together Leading economies, of course, play a crucial role. Also, quality investment, it says, again, a sort of relationship between advanced countries and developing countries. The developing countries must be given access to green infrastructure and quality investment in order to meet the challenge of climate change better. Of course, the larger issue of climate change will be dealt in the COP26 conference that will also take place in UK and Glasgow later this year in 2021. So those were some of the highlights of the G7 summit that has started in the United Kingdom. And as the G7 summit begins, UK is the host and holds the presidency of the summit, as I mentioned. And finding tangible solutions to the pandemic is the key objective. There is a pledge for supplying about 1 billion vaccine doses to nations in need, developing nations. From India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will participate virtually in G7 outreach sessions. And besides India, leaders from Australia, South Korea and South Africa have also been invited. G7 is a group of 7 advanced economies, and the summit is expected to boost India's strategic cooperation with the West. Here's more.
Leaders from the 6 other member nations of the G7 touched down in England for the meet in Cornwall from the 11th to the 13th of June. The G7 comprises the US, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Canada and Japan. The United Kingdom currently holds the presidency of the grouping. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has invited India, along with Australia, Republic of Korea and South Africa, as guest countries for the summit. Since 2014, this is the second time Prime Minister Modi will be participating in a G7 meeting. India had been invited by the G7 French presidency in 2019 to the Biarritz summit as a goodwill partner, and Prime Minister participated in the sessions on climate, biodiversity and oceans and digital transformation. The theme of the 47th G7 summit is Build Back Better, and the UK has outlined 4 priority areas for its presidency. These are leading the global recovery from coronavirus while strengthening resilience against future pandemics, promoting future prosperity by championing free and fair trade, tackling climate change and preserving the planet's biodiversity, and championing shared values and open societies. The leaders are expected to exchange views on the way forward for the world amid the pandemic, with focus on health and climate change.
There are global problems we can only tackle together. We want China on board to deal with climate change so that we can tackle that together. We can't deal with climate change unless we can bring China on board. We equally need to be very clear about some of the hostile state activity that Russia's been engaged in, particularly, for example, cyber attacks. Standing up for the international order, being clear about the rules that apply, being clear about the values that apply, that's a pretty important message to come out of this G7.
Another issue will obviously be how to restart the world economy. We will find strong words here in support of multilateralism. We want to work together, especially on the issue of climate protection and biodiversity, where we will never find solutions without China. I hope we will achieve very good results here to show that we are not only thinking of ourselves, but also of those who do not yet have a possibility to get vaccinated, especially the countries in Africa, but also elsewhere.
India will seek to highlight some of its regional and global priorities in the summit. On the vaccine front, New Delhi is set to push for European Union support for a waiver of patent protections for COVID-19 vaccines. India opposes the proposed vaccine passport system as it would discriminate against the developing world, where only a small fraction of the population has been inoculated against COVID-19. And to tackle China's economic ambitions in the region, India's efficient trade integration with the US, UK and EU is vital, particularly taking global supply chains into account. The stand that the G7 takes on further probe of the origins of COVID-19 in face of China's opposition is also going to be a key outcome of this summit. Bureau Report, DD India.
And that brings us to the issue in focus this evening. We're talking about decoding the G7 agenda as the international summit kickstarts in the UK. 2 eminent guests joining me for this conversation. We have with us Mr. Vishnu Prakash, former senior diplomat, also Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, DG Research and Information System for Developing Countries. Good evening and welcome, gentlemen. Professor Chaturvedi, if I can begin with you. It sounds like a big number, 1 billion doses of vaccine by end of next year, it's 2022. But from the perspective of developing countries, how does this pledge appear adequate and urgent as is necessary?
This is, I think, one of the most important outcomes that we are expecting of the G7 countries. But I think several other important facets of this decision are to be explored. Like, for instance, some of the thought leaders and key global institutions have also been invited, and I'm keenly awaiting what IMF has to say, because quite a few countries are grappling with the question. Like, for instance, in case of India, the export restrictions on raw material should go away. India has spoken to US, they have agreed, but there should be a formal decision, which yesterday France President Macron has suggested that the G7 should discuss. The second is the amount of money that would be required. And as you can imagine, a huge credit line would have to be given to developing countries, particularly in Africa, for this mass vaccination. So you require vaccines, you require resources. And this summit, I think, is extremely important to provide that leadership. And failure to deliver this time would be a step towards irrelevance of this organization. So if G7 has to prove its relevance, they would have to deliver at this point. And I think it is absolutely essential that they deliver at least on this front of pandemics, through vaccine and through the monetary support that the production and distribution requires.
Right. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, while G7 is about the congregation of the most advanced, rich countries and economies, the focus is on providing aid in time to the developing countries, to the poorer nations. In that sense, how do you look at the guest countries who are participating, including India, South Korea, Australia, and South Africa? What role do you see they're going to play in this edition of the summit?
Well, that is a very pertinent question. Now, the main focus of G7, let us be clear, is to take care of the issues that have a direct relevance for the rich boys and or the rich countries. It's an informal grouping, and they are more focused on bread and butter issues about the global economy, about their own well-being and so on. But in as much as they are also 7 important countries, 3 of which are permanent members of the UN Security Council, they play multiple roles. They also get into other issues which are of importance. And as you were mentioning, this time there are certain issues which are quite pressing and important, including the coronavirus, free trade, climate change. I will put it as 4 C's for ease of reference. It is COVID, China, climate change, and commerce. Now, certainly leadership is required when it comes to the pandemic, and the world has been found wanting. There is the vaccine nationalism that has been taking place, and experts believe that certain developing countries are 77 times less likely, or the developed world is 77 times more likely to have access to vaccine. Now that is a kind of inequity. The task before the global community is humongous. 7.5 crore people, which means that you need something like 16 to 17 crore vaccine doses. It is a very big task, and everything counts. So if the G7 plus the outreach countries can come together and clear the restrictions, the roadblocks in the way of production of vaccine, because we have faced that, others are facing it, ramp up the production facilities and actually assist in having vaccines going to developing countries, it will be a huge favor. Right. Let us see how it pans out. There is an aspirational aspect, but the important thing is implementation, and that is where I think the voice of India is quite important, because I'm sure the Prime Minister is going to speak very effectively and bring out the importance of this very pressing challenge for the mankind.
Right. Professor Chaturvedi, again, the idea of vaccine distribution. Now, effective vaccine distribution is going to be closely linked to efficient vaccine manufacturing as well. Now, in that context, waiving the vaccine patent has been an issue on which the opinion has been divided. The perspective of the developed countries which holds the copyright, the company that holds the copyright, and the developing poorer nations who would do much better if they're able to produce the vaccines in their own country. On that issue, how do you see the two worlds coming together?
I think Prime Minister should raise this issue tomorrow when he interacts, and I think it is important for India to reiterate what India proposed, not now, but last year in July. The first proposal from India and South Africa got finalized and subsequently circulated. The new proposal that has been revised now by India and South Africa has got all the developing countries, even US is agreeing. The EU's new proposal, which is in response to India and South Africa's proposal, is not going to help at all. This is restrictive, and I think the flexibilities within TRIPS and the idea of TRIPS waiver is something that developing countries themselves have decided not to go for compulsory license. Our Commerce and Trade Minister, Piyush Goyal, has made it absolutely clear that compulsory licensing would be our last resort. So we are respecting the intellectual property, but whatever waiver time is required, I think is extremely important. The TRIPS waiver is for vaccinating the whole world, the Africa and many other countries who are not able to afford it. India has demonstrated by the success of domestic production, India's capability for vaccination, but we require more, and this is the time EU should come forward and support the TRIPS waiver and let the tax-based discussion, which has just been initiated at WTO, to come to an end with fruitful results as the G7 should actually decide about it. So this polarization should end, and there should be a clear message for global vaccination. Donation would not help, and what's very important is to enable countries to produce and supply. And that's where the equitability would come in.
Right. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, another theme related to the vaccine that sort of seems to polarize the world is the issue of vaccine passport. India has clearly opposed it, saying it's unfair to sort of put that sort of a label, that sort of a condition on developing and poorer countries, which have a far larger population to vaccinate and protect. How do you see the international community again could converge on an issue like this?
I think this is a difficult call for the simple reason that there is a huge gap between the developed world and the developing world. Israel, for example, has already vaccinated the entire population. The US is coming close, and there are certain countries which have not got even a single dose. So there is a vast gap, and by the time developing countries all developing countries are vaccinated, it seems that could be 2024. So it is a tough call. I really don't know how this can be harmonized, because the Western world or the developed world is insistent on introducing that to facilitate their own travel. There is a lot of pressure from the travel industry. This is their season, and I think reconciling these objectives will be difficult. That's how I feel. What I feel about it.
Right. Also, Ambassador Prakash, will this edition of G7, while the priority is to make vaccine accessible to the countries and people who do not have them, do you think the scope of it also allows perhaps an emphasis on the investigation into the origins of COVID-19? We've seen the issue, coming up and then sort of taking a backseat. Given that an accountability from China is required, and this is a congregation of powerful nations, powerful democracies, more importantly, do you think there would be a scope in it to take the issue?
I'm very happy that you are raising this question, which goes to the heart of the problem. There is a lot of fog. There is a lot of moving pieces and missing pieces. Let me very briefly touch upon a couple of them which are very pertinent. The California lab in the US on the 20th of May 2020 came up with a report and study where it said that a lab leak was plausible and suggested further investigation. At that time, the Trump administration had 8 months to go. And naturally, the report would have come to the Trump presidency immediately. And we would recall that in June, July onwards, both President Trump and Secretary Pompeo started blaming China. And there were some also insinuations that there was a lab leak. Nothing happened. The report reaches the State Department in October 2020 after 4 months. It is then their investigation results are brought out on the 15th of January. Now, my simple question that I ask myself is the following. American lives were being lost, and there was no sense of urgency when there was, and you cannot have a smoking gun. You will only have circumstantial evidence. And today, 18 months have passed, 18 months, and the trail is turning cold. And we are talking about openness and transparency. I'm afraid I'm not convinced. I'm afraid there are some things that we are missing. There seems to be something much more than meets the eye, but all said and done, even if now the international community were to wake up, smell the coffee, and push China to come out clean, it will be a favor to humanity.
Right. And Professor Chaturvedi, finally, another key agenda apart from the pandemic is also the issue of climate change that concerns us all. India has much to lead with example. They've sort of set to exceed targets that they had put for the Paris Agreement. The advanced nations will have much of the accountability to present.
That is right. Shweta, if you see COP26, which Britain would be hosting a little later, has come out with several sort of documents that would be there. But I think one crucial issue here is in terms of access to green bonds. And if you look at the quantum of green bonds that have been issued so far is almost $196 billion. And this is just double of what was done last year, $93.7 billion. But the question really here is that with Basel norms and other global norms, the access to green fund is becoming extremely expensive for developing countries. And this is where greater sensitivity of G7 is required. We also need G7 to be sensitive in terms of transferring the technologies that are needed along with climate change. So as we all set for COP26 later, India's commitment on Paris is absolutely clear. India's participation with CDRI, India's participation with International Solar Alliance is a testimony to that. And India is enabling many other partner countries to deliver. But I think G7 would have to come forward. And I think the UK's Prime Minister is absolutely right. He said yesterday, we should not repeat the mistakes of 2008 and should not bring in financial crisis when we are actually facing pandemics. So what is required is to relax the kind of restrictive regimes that have come up in finance, particularly when it comes to climate change and access to technologies.
Right. On that note, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, thanks very much for joining us in Newsnight and sharing your perspective. And meanwhile, the G7 summit in Cornwall, UK is kicked off, and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged fellow leaders to build back better. That's the theme of the summit as the world recovers from COVID pandemic. UK Prime Minister said it is vital to learn from the mistakes of 2008 financial crisis and tackle the scar of inequality.
We need to make sure that we learn the lessons from the pandemic. We need to make sure that we don't repeat some of the errors that we doubtless made in the course of the last 18 months or so. And we need to make sure that we now allow our economies to recover. I think that inequalities may be entrenched, and we need to make sure that as we recover, we level up across our societies and we build back better. And I actually think that we have a huge opportunity to do that, because as G7, we are united in our vision for a cleaner, greener world, a solution to the problems of climate change. I think that is what the people of of our countries now want us to focus on. They want us to be sure that we're beating the pandemic together and discussing how we'll never have a repeat of what we've seen.
And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Friday expressed support for the Tokyo Olympics at a meeting with Japan's Yoshihide Suga and welcomed efforts to ensure the Games can take place safely. Johnson met with Suga ahead of the G7 summit in Carbis Bay, Cornwall. Johnson is hosting leaders in the first in-person meeting of the leaders of major developed economies for nearly a couple of years. Meanwhile, the Tokyo 2020 Olympic torch relay completed its two-day journey around the Amore prefecture in Hashinoe City on Friday. Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee President Seiko Hashimoto told a news conference that they would be grateful if a group of 7 countries could support the Summer Games going ahead as planned. The Games are slated to begin on July 23rd. Moving on, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Shankar addressed the members of the Indian community in Kuwait. Dr. Shankar said that the government has been focusing on the welfare of the Indian community there. He also announced that an MOU has been finalized between the Indian ambassador and the Kuwaiti officials that strengthens the position of Indian workers in Kuwait.
I was particularly pleased that a matter which has been long pending, which is the an MOU relating to our domestic workers here, that was finalized and signed by the ambassador and the Kuwaiti official, which in many ways streamlines and strengthens the position of our workers in Kuwait.
And the minister also thanked Kuwait for prompt assistance to India by providing oxygen to India in time of need.
It was very helpful for us to get oxygen supplies from abroad, and among the countries which actually took the lead, I would particularly single out Kuwait in this regard. They provided us, I think, more than 500 metric tons, and they're very prompt and very efficient in that regard.
In an independent appraisal report, United Nations Development Programme, India has lauded the Aspirational Districts Programme as a very successful model of local area development that should serve as a best practice for several other countries where regional disparities in development status persist for many reasons. The report says, due to concerted effort made under the ADP, previously neglected districts, including those in remote locations and those affected by left-wing extremism, have experienced more growth and development in the last 3 years than ever before. Notwithstanding some speed bumps in its journey, our aspirational district program has been immensely successful in propelling development among backward districts. UNDP's analysis across the 5 key sectors of ADP, that's health and nutrition, education, agriculture and water resources, along with basic infrastructure and skill development and financial inclusion, found that the program has acted as a catalyst for expediting development in these districts. The report also acknowledges remarkable commitment shown by topmost political leadership of the country, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, towards the program. The report says ADP is aligned to the principle of leave no one behind, the vital core of sustainable development goals. Political commitment at the highest level has resulted in rapid success of the program. The report was handed over today by UNDP India Resident Representative Shoko Noda to Niti Aayog Vice Chairman Dr. Rajiv Kumar and CEO Amitabh Kant. The International Monetary Fund has welcomed the steps taken by the Government of India to facilitate access to COVID-19 vaccination and increase production of essential drugs required in combating the coronavirus infections. IMF spokesperson Gary Rice told reporters that organization has strongly welcomed India's announcement to facilitate access to vaccinations.
The IMF welcomes the Indian government's announcement to facilitate access to vaccinations and to provide additional support to minimize the social cost of the pandemic and to relieve the very human costs of the pandemic. We strongly welcome the government's announcement on that point.
Nepal police on Friday arrested 20 civil society activists from the leaders from a protest site near Prime Minister's residence in Kathmandu. The civil society activists hit the streets of Kathmandu protesting the government's intervention into operations of Medical Education Commission, commercialization of health sector and other medical related issues. Earlier on Thursday, the civil society activists had issued a statement warning the government not to make medical sector a political tool. Swiss city Geneva will host the summit between United States President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin on June 16th. Biden is also scheduled to hold talks with Swiss President Guy Parmelin. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Lavrov will accompany Biden and Putin. The meeting will take place in an 18th century Swiss villa overlooking Lake Geneva. Over the years, Geneva summits have been critical to U.S.-Russia relationship as the global city also hosted first summit between United States and Soviet leaders in 1955. French President Emmanuel Macron has said that NATO still needs to make clear its strategic priorities nearly a year after he said that transatlantic alliance was brain dead. Macron told news conference that NATO needs to work out a strategy regarding Russia, while China should not be the alliance's priority.
We need to strategically clarify in several respects where NATO is going. First of all, what kind of relationship do we want with Russia? I think that the organization needs to build a peaceful framework with Russia that is demanding, intractable, even when there are incursions, cyber attacks, intimidation, but also to take in account the geography of the Europe. The organization needs to clarify a framework in terms of arms controls, which we do not have today. We need to know who our enemies are and where.
India participated at the UNSC meeting on UN Disengagement Observer Force for Israel-Syria ceasefire. Indian counselor at the UN, Pratik Mathur, recalled the supreme sacrifice by Indian peacekeeper Sepoy Johnson Beck of UN Disengagement Observer Force. India is the third largest troop contributor to the body. Pratik Mathur reiterated that protecting blue helmets is of utmost priority. He described the role of UNDOF as crucial. On to some weather news. With the southwest monsoon advancement at a good pace, India Met Department has said that the conditions are favorable for it to cover the entire West Bengal and Jharkhand over the next couple of days. Monsoon has further advanced into some more parts of South Gujarat region. Remaining parts of Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh and some parts of South Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and South Orissa.
Heavy rains lash Mumbai during monsoons every year, leading to traffic snarls and severe waterlogging that adds to the troubles of Mumbaikars. This year was no different. The first rains of this year's monsoon season in Mumbai caused waterlogging in various parts of the city, leaving roads, subways, rail tracks and neighborhoods inundated. Mumbai city, its suburbs and Nagpur city witnessed light showers on Friday. The BMC is taking steps to reduce waterlogging.
महानगर पालिका ने तय किया है कि दोनों तरफ से जो हिंद माता का तो प्रॉब्लम अभी भी सॉल्व हो जाएगा. बहुत ही कम अभी पानी हो रहा है, पानी तुरंत जा भी रहा है, तो हिंद माता का क्रॉनिक वो तो खत्म होगा, लेकिन किंग सर्कल, बॉम्बे सेंट्रल वगैरह ये तरफ से एक अलग पंप बनाने के लिए जो अधिकारी वर्ग रहते हैं, जो तज्ञ, उनकी कल बातचीत हुई है, उनको अपॉइंट करके ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा उधर का पानी जो आने वाला है वो दोनों तरफ से लेके कैसे जो अपना सी है उसको कैसा पहुंचा जाएगा, इसके लिए भी हम काम कर रहे हैं.
IMD has issued orange alert for Mumbai, Palghar, Thane, Raigad, Ratnagiri, Sindhudurg besides Bhandara, Chandrapur, Gadchiroli, Gondia and Nagpur. In Ratnagiri, curfew has been imposed for Friday and Saturday following IMD's warning. The Met Office has predicted heavy to very heavy rainfall that is likely to continue in parts of Konkan, central Maharashtra, Marathwada and Vidarbha due to consolidation of westerly winds till June the 15th. Southwest monsoon has further advanced into South Gujarat, South Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and most parts of North Bay of Bengal and more parts of West Bengal on Friday. Conditions are favourable for further advancement of southwest monsoon into some more parts of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, remaining parts of Chhattisgarh and Odisha, entire West Bengal, Jharkhand, Bihar, some parts of East Uttar Pradesh and remaining parts of North Bay of Bengal during the next 48 hours. People in Delhi, NCR, Haryana and parts of UP and Rajasthan got a stroke of relief from the scorching summer heat as thundering pre-monsoon showers rinsed the region late Thursday night. According to IMD, heavy rainfall is forecast for Saturday in Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh, whereas Delhi, NCR will witness light to moderate pre-monsoon showers. With Tapas Bhattacharya, Bureau Report, DD India.
Let's now scan through some more news and developments from across the country in National Wrap.
At the domestic bourses, benchmark indices climbed to fresh peaks on Friday. So the Sensex at the BSE advanced 174 points or 0.3% to a fresh record closing high of 52,475. Earlier in the morning, the Sensex had also hit a new intraday peak. And the Nifty at the National Stock Exchange gained 62 points or 0.4% to a record closing high of 15,799. Earlier, the Nifty had also touched a fresh intraday peak. Among the sectors, the IT, metal and pharma indices rose between 1 to 2%, while selling was seen in FMCG and PSU banking stocks. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Delhi today. Yogi Adityanath also met BJP National President JP Nadda. Former BJP National Vice President Mukul Roy and his son Shubhranshu Roy joined the TMC in the presence of West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee in Kolkata today. Roy had joined the Bharatiya Janata Party in 2017. Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh dedicated to the nation 2 centres of excellence established by the Border Roads Organisation BRO at the Seema Sadak Bhavan in New Delhi. These centres have been established to achieve excellence in road safety as well as to foster growth in construction of roads, bridges, airfields and tunnels. Veteran actor Dilip Kumar has been discharged from hospital after undergoing pleural aspiration procedure. The actor was admitted to the Hinduja Hospital in Mumbai after complaining of breathlessness on Sunday. His wife, Saira Bano, thanked all the supporters for their prayers. The Bombay High Court has wrapped the BMC for building collapse incidents in the city. The recent incident of Malad in particular. The court said that it is extremely saddened with the Malad building incident in which 11 people, including 8 children, lost their lives. The High Court ordered for a judicial inquiry into the incident. The report is to be submitted to the High Court on June 24th. The High Court also warned the civic body of stern action if any other building collapses in the city now. Prominent neurologist and Padma Shri recipient Dr. Ashok Pangadia died of post-COVID complications. He was 71. Expressing grief over his death, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, Dr. Ashok Pangadia made a mark as an outstanding neurologist. His pioneering work in the medical field will benefit generations of doctors and researchers. Saddened by his demise, condolences to his family and friends. Om Shanti.
Union Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad attacked Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal over his plans for doorstep delivery of food ration in the national capital, accusing the ruling Aam Aadmi Party of links to Russian mafia. Prasad demanded to know why Delhi government had still not implemented Centre's One Nation, One Ration Card scheme. More in this report.
Coming down hard on Delhi government's food grain delivery system, Union Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad slammed Kejriwal government, accusing it of links to the ration mafia. Addressing a press conference in Delhi, senior BJP leader claimed that its proposal of home delivery of subsidized grains is merely a show to promote a scam.
अरविंद केजरीवाल जी हर घर अन्न की बात कर रहे हैं, घर घर पहुंचाएंगे। ऑक्सीजन तो पहुंचा नहीं सके, मोहल्ला क्लिनिक दवा तो पहुंचा नहीं सकी, अब अनाज की बात कर रहे हैं। दिल्ली सरकार राशन माफिया के नियंत्रण में है, उनके सारे फैसले, और ये बात मैं बड़ी जिम्मेवारी से बोल रहा हूं।
Union Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad demanded to know why Delhi had still not implemented Centre's One Nation, One Ration Card scheme, which ensures economically weaker sections to get subsidized food grains. Union Minister further raised questions on the status of SC and STs in Delhi and what the state government has been doing for them.
ये 10 फरवरी 2021 की चिट्ठी है। भारत सरकार ने आग्रह किया, कंज्यूमर अफेयर्स मिनिस्ट्री की ओर से जवाब है दिल्ली प्रदेश का, नॉट अवेलेबल, नॉट अवेलेबल, नॉट अवेलेबल। आपके पास ये भी डाटा नहीं है कि कितने हमारे दलित समाज के, कितने हमारे वनवासी समाज के बंधु हैं यहाँ पर, और उनको आप राशन कार्ड में कितना सहयोग कर रहे हैं।
Responding to this remark, Delhi's Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia said that delivery of ration should not be an issue in an era of doorstep delivery. Clarifying the matter, BJP said, Centre is providing food grains under National Food Security Act and Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana through public distribution system, and Delhi government scheme will temper the Centre's scheme. Every month, around 37,533 tons of food grains is being provided to Delhi government for distribution. Centre has also asked Delhi government to implement the One Nation, One Ration Card scheme for the benefit of all. With inputs from Shailendra Mishra, Bureau Report, DD India.
And preparations are underway to celebrate the International Day of Yoga on June 21st. Union Minister of State for Youth Affairs and Sports, Kiran Rijiju, urged all to join this year's celebrations with their families and friends from home. Kiran Rijiju said that ministry's aim is to bring more citizens into the fold of activity of International Day of Yoga than previous years. He said that yoga has the potential to solve many of psychological and emotional challenges of present times.
The central message of this 10-day series is Be with Yoga, Be at Home, which is relevant in these times of health emergency. Yoga has the potential to resolve many of the psychological and emotional challenges of the present times. The efficacy of yoga in health promotion and in the management and prevention of diseases has been well established. The benefits of yoga towards immunity building and stress relief are demonstrated through evidence. The ministry's aim is to bring more citizens into the fold of the activities of International Day of Yoga than the previous years.
And Union Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Prakash Javadekar, urged everyone to do yoga regularly. The minister said yoga is a gift to the world, and people around the world, in fact, are subscribing and participating in yoga enthusiastically.
Yoga practice is not one-day affair. Unless you do regularly, you can't do it correctly. And therefore the spread of yoga throughout the world, this is India's gift to the world. This is India's one of the soft power. And I have seen many universities in the world, as well as there are many new yoga centers where yoga is taught. And people are subscribing to it, participating in it. This is really a phenomenon which was one nation phenomena has become the world phenomena.
And that brings us to the close of this edition of News Night. Namaskar.
Namaste land.